The frost hadn't melted off the parking lot yet when Eli Tanner pushed his cart across the lobby of Brennan and Voss Capital, the wheels catching on the seam between marble tiles, the way they always did at exactly the same spot, the same hour, the same silence. It was 5:40 in the morning. The building belonged to him at this hour, or it felt that way. The wide atrium with its glass elevators, the dead quiet of the reception desk, the hum of the HVAC system that nobody else ever seemed to notice. He liked it like this, nobody asking him to move faster. Nobody looking through him like he was part of the furniture, because at this hour there was nobody to do the looking. His daughter, Hannah, was 7, and she'd fallen asleep on the kitchen counter the night before, with a half-finished spelling worksheet under her cheek, the word necessary spelled wrong 3 times before she got it right on the 4th. He'd carried her to bed at 11:40 and set his alarm for 4:15. Because the laundry wasn't going to do itself and neither was the dishwasher, and somewhere in there he'd also need to remember her field trip permission slip, due Friday, which he'd already signed twice because he kept losing track of where he put it. He moved through the lobby with the kind of quiet competence that 31 years of practice gives a person. Not 31 years on this job, just 31 years of learning how to exist in rooms where he wasn't really wanted. Eli had a face that people forgot 2 minutes after meeting him. He'd come to think of it as useful. Above him on the 19th floor, the lights in the East Conference Room had been on since before he'd even clocked in. That wasn't normal. Through the frosted glass, he could see shapes moving, too many shapes too early, too fast for a Tuesday. He didn't think much of it. People in suits did strange things at strange hours. That was sort of the whole architecture of corporate life, near as he could tell from the outside of it. He pushed his cart to the supply closet on 17, restocked the paper towels, wiped down the steel counter in the break room, the same rhythm he'd run for 2 years and 4 months at this building. Ever since the warehouse job dried up and a friend of a friend mentioned Brennan and Voss was hiring overnight custodial. By 6:50, the noise from the 19th floor had become impossible to ignore. Voices weren't just raised, they were cracking. The kind of cracking that happens when people who are used to controlling every room they walk into suddenly find themselves in one they can't. Eli rode the freight elevator up with his cart because that was his route, third Tuesday cleaning rotation, conference rooms, and executive restrooms. He didn't expect to be noticed, he never was. The East Conference Room door wasn't fully shut. Through the gap, he caught sight of papers fanned across a long table, like a hand of cards nobody wanted to be holding. A woman stood at the head of it, dark blazer, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt, hands flat against the table like she was holding it down. A stack of documents sat in front of her with a pen resting on top, capped like it was waiting for permission. He recognized her, everyone in the building did. Renee Callaway. Her name was on the building, practically. Callaway Voss Capital, the firm her grandfather started in 1962, the firm that had survived 2 recessions and outlasted 3 competitors that used to be twice its size. Eli had read about her once in a magazine somebody left in the break room. Youngest managing partner in the firm's history, a man near the window, silver-templed, expensive watch, the kind of voice that assumed it would always be listened to, was speaking fast and clipped. The Hendricks deal collapses if we don't file by 10. We are out of runway, Renee. Sign it. She didn't sign it. Her hand hovered. Eli should have kept moving. That was the rule, unspoken but absolute. Don't linger near closed doors. Don't read what isn't yours. Don't let your eyes catch on numbers that have nothing to do with you. He'd followed that rule for 2 years without breaking it once. But a page had slid off the edge of the table during some gesture or shuffle, and it had drifted, light as a leaf, out through the gap in the door and landed face up 3 feet from his cart. He almost left it. He almost just kept walking because picking it up meant looking at it, and looking at it meant knowing things a janitor had no business knowing. Then he saw the number. It sat in a column labeled Receivables, Net of Reserve, and something about it sat wrong in his chest the way a flat note sits wrong in a song you've heard 100 times. He'd spent 4 years at Purdue studying actuarial science before life rerouted him somewhere else entirely, and even 6 years removed from a classroom, some part of his brain still ran numbers the way other people hummed songs stuck in their heads. He couldn't turn it off. He'd tried. He stood there too long. Long enough that when he finally looked up, his heart was doing something strange and fast in his chest, and the only sound in the hallway was the soft, persistent squeak of his cart's back wheel, still rolling slightly because he'd forgotten to set the brake. The pen in Renee Callaway's hand uncapped, touched paper, and before he could stop himself, before 31 years of learning to be invisible could override 6 seconds of instinct, Eli pushed the door open and said, "Ma'am, I think there's an error on that page." Every head in the room turned. The man by the window, Davis Underhill Eli would learn later, the firm's CFO, looked at him like he'd just watched a chair stand up and start talking. For a full second, nobody said anything. Then Underhill exhaled through his nose, sharp and disbelieving. This floor is restricted. Who let him up here? Ellie's pulse hammered hard enough that he could feel it in his ears, but he didn't step back, and he didn't look away from Renee. The receivables figure on this page, ma'am. I think it's been adjusted somewhere it shouldn't have been. Underhill let out a short laugh, more startled than amused. You think? His eyes dropped to Eli's badge, the gray uniform, the mop bucket still parked half in the doorway. You clean offices. Yes, sir. Eli didn't deny it because there was nothing to deny. But that reserve number doesn't track with what it should be if the Castle Ridge account was already written down last quarter. The room went very still in a different way now. Two of the junior associates against the wall exchanged a glance. Renee's eyes moved from Eli to the page in front of her, then back to him, slow, assessing the kind of look that didn't dismiss things easily even when every instinct in the room told her to. Come here, she said. Underhill turned toward her, already objecting. Renee, I said, come here. Eli stepped forward, his shoes leaving faint damp prints on the polished floor from where he'd mopped the lobby an hour earlier. He was aware of how rough his hands looked against the smooth edge of the conference table, aware of the faint chemical smell of industrial cleaner that clung to his uniform no matter how many times he washed it. He pointed to the line. This says receivables increased here after the reserve adjustment. But if the reserve already accounted for Castle Ridge, this number should have dropped, not climbed. It's like the system pulled from before the write-down instead of after. Underhill stepped in fast. That's enough. This is a conversation for people who actually understand the model. But Renee had already slid the page toward a young analyst seated near the wall, a woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and a laptop she hadn't closed since the meeting started. Pull the Castle Ridge schedule. Now, the analyst Priya, somebody called her, blinked like she wasn't sure the instruction was serious, then pulled her laptop closer, fingers already moving. The room held its breath in an awkward electric kind of silence. Eli stood there with his hands at his sides, unsure whether he'd just done something that mattered or something that would get him fired before lunch. Underhill folded his arms and stared a hole through the side of Eli's face. You're wasting the room's time, Underhill said. We have 40 minutes before the Hendricks filing window closes. Renee didn't answer him. She watched the analyst's screen instead, then Prisha stopped typing. Her expression shifted, small at first, then unmistakable. Wait. Underhill's jaw tightened. What? She typed again, slower. The write-down never flowed through. It's still sitting in a suspense account. The reserve adjustment references the wrong ledger period. Another analyst leaned over her shoulder, scanning the same screen, and went pale. She's right, he said. Check the variance column. It's been carrying the gross figure since March. Renee rose halfway out of her chair. Say that again, clearly. If this is corrected, Priya said, we're overstating receivables exposure by roughly $31 million. Which means the liquidity position isn't what the Hendricks filing says it is. It's better. Nobody moved. Somewhere outside the conference room, a phone rang and nobody answered it. Underhill stood up too fast, his chair scraping hard against the floor. That's not possible. I reviewed that schedule myself. When? Renee asked, and her voice had changed, quieter, but with something underneath it now, something that hadn't been there a minute ago. Last week, with the team. Priya was still scrolling. The last edit on this cell was 3 nights ago. The room seemed to lean in collectively, even though nobody actually moved. Whose login? Renee asked. Priya's eyes flicked up, then back down, like she didn't want to be the one saying it. Yours, Davis. I mean, it's logged under your credentials. That's routine, Underhill said, too fast, the words tumbling over each other. I make corrections during close. That's literally my job at 1:45 in the morning? Renee asked. You don't get to interrogate my hours, Renee. Not today. Not with the filing clock running. But something in the room had already shifted, a tiny crack spreading under the surface of everyone's certainty, and Renee was looking at Eli now. Not as an interruption anymore, but as something else entirely. How did you see that? From a glance at one page? Eli hesitated because the honest answer wasn't simple, and it wasn't anything he'd told anyone at this company in 2 years. Numbers stay with me, ma'am, even when I don't want them to. I saw the figure didn't match what it should, and I couldn't make myself unsee it. Underhill let out a brittle laugh. Are we seriously about to restructure the Hendricks filing because the janitor has a feeling? Renee ignored him entirely. What's your name? Eli Tanner. How long have you worked here, Eli? 2 years. A little over. And before that, he glanced toward the window for half a second, the gray morning light just starting to show behind the skyline. Warehouse work. Before that, I was at Purdue, actuarial science. I didn't finish, Underhill scoffed. A college dropout is now auditing a $250 million filing. He's right about a second cell, too, Priya said suddenly, voice tightening. Every head turned back to her screen. The allowance percentage on the consumer segment is pulling from the same broken reference. Underhill's face lost color, just slightly, just for a second, but Renee saw it, so did Eli. She stood, walked around the table herself, and read the figures directly off the screen, her composure visibly fraying at the edges in a way Eli suspected almost nobody in this room had ever seen. 31 million became 36, then 41. The filing deadline, once an immovable wall, started to look less like a sentence and more like a decision someone had rushed her into making. Who built this model originally? She asked, not looking up. Finance under my supervision, Underhill said. Who signed off on the latest revisions? We all did. It went through standard review. But the room no longer trusted that sentence the way it would have an hour earlier. Eli felt it the way you feel weather changing. The particular quiet that settles over a room when the person who's always controlled it stops being believed. Renee set the pen down flat on the table instead of capping it. Nobody signs anything. Nobody leaves this floor. We re-verify every linked schedule before this filing goes anywhere. Underhill's voice climbed. Investors are expecting the filing by 10. You cannot blow a regulatory deadline over an unverified. Then they'll wait, Renee said. She looked at Eli. You too, stay. Eli blinked. Ma'am, I have a route to finish. Floor 12 restrooms. Your route just changed. She turned to her assistant, hovering uncertain near the door. Reassign floor 12. Mr. Tanner is needed here. Underhill stepped closer to her, voice dropped low enough to sound almost reasonable, almost private. This is reckless, Renee. You're letting a janitor steer corporate strategy. She met his eyes without blinking. Signing a federal filing based on numbers that might be fabricated would be reckless. This is just math. He had no answer for that. For the first time all morning, Davis Underhill had nothing to say. For the next hour, the room transformed. Analysts pulled up spreadsheet after spreadsheet, cross-referencing ledgers that hadn't been touched in months. Every 15 minutes, someone found another inconsistency. A duplicated vendor liability here, an insurance reimbursement excluded from the summary there, a maintenance reserve that had been counted twice across 2 reporting periods. None of them alone would have changed the company's trajectory. Together, they rewrote the entire story the filing had been built to tell. Eli stood near the back wall in his gray uniform, hands clasped in front of him, increasingly aware that he had no idea what he was supposed to be doing, now that the bucket and mop felt like props from a life he'd briefly stepped out of. Word was already moving through the building. Employees noticed executives who weren't leaving, analysts running between floors, an unscheduled silence hanging over the 19th floor that nobody could explain yet. Nobody downstairs knew the cause was a man standing quietly by a wall, doing the math in his head about whether he'd make it to Hannah's 11:30 dentist appointment. Renee noticed the glance at his watch. Somewhere you need to be? My daughter has a dentist appointment at 11:30. I'm supposed to pick her up from school. Underhill, still simmering, muttered something about running a daycare now that nobody acknowledged. How old is she? Renee asked. 7. Who takes her if you can't? Nobody. Today. Her mother's not. He stopped himself, recalibrated. It's just me. Rennie studied him for a long moment, then turned to her assistant through the glass. Call Lindale Elementary. Tell them Hannah Tanner's pickup is being handled, and her father has corporate authorization for the delay if needed. That's not necessary, ma'am. Neither was almost filing bankruptcy on broken math, she said, and for just a second, something almost like a smile crossed her face before vanishing again under the weight of the morning. It was Priya who broke the next silence, voice tight with a different kind of energy now. There's something else. External transfers. 3 of them routed through a consulting entity called Bright Lane Advisory. Total comes to just under $9 million. The room turned. Consulting for what? Renee asked. Priya scanned the attachments. There aren't any. No deliverables on file. Emergency restructuring support, Underhill said quickly. Augurized under my emergency signing authority during the crisis window. Augurized before board approval, Renee asked. There wasn't time for board approval. You were the one who told me to move fast. Ellie's eyes had drifted to the transfer dates on the screen, and something in him went quiet and cold. Those dates, he said. They line up with when the bankruptcy narrative started accelerating same week. Renee's gaze sharpened on Underhill in a way it hadn't yet that morning. Who owns Bright Lane? Independent firm, Underhill said. Outside group, no relation to us. Priya kept typing, then stopped. Registered 5 months ago. The filing address. She frowned, refreshed the page, frowned harder. It matches the legal office listed for Halvorson Group. The air in the room changed entirely. Halvorson Group was the lender pressing hardest for the Hendricks bankruptcy filing. The same firm that had pulled its rescue financing at dawn that morning. The same firm currently waiting on the other end of a scheduled call to confirm the paperwork had gone through. That proves nothing, Underhill said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Corporate structures overlap all the time. It proves enough, Renee said, that you don't speak again until legal is in this room. He laughed, but it came out thin. Based on spreadsheet paranoia and a janitor's hunch? Based on falsified figures, manipulated timestamps, and money moving in directions that benefit the people pushing hardest for collapse, Renee said. Sit down, Davis. He didn't sit. He stood there a second too long, calculating something behind his eyes, and then walked toward the door instead, phone already in hand. Two members of building security, summoned by Renee's assistant, met him in the hallway. He didn't go quietly, but he went. When the door closed behind him, the silence that followed felt different from every silence that had come before it that morning. Charged, uncertain, but no longer collapsing inward. Renee exhaled like she hadn't taken a real breath in hours and turned to look at Eli properly for the first time. Tell me who you actually are. He looked uncomfortable under the question, the way he always did when people pushed past the uniform. Just Eli Tanner. No, she said quietly. People don't read a balance sheet like a weather forecast unless numbers used to matter to them. Tell me the rest. He hesitated because this was the part he hadn't given to anyone at this company, not once in 2 years. I was at Purdue, actuarial science, going for my certification. My wife got sick during my junior year. Ovarian cancer, caught late. I left school to take care of her, and after she passed, I had Hannah to think about. There wasn't a version of finishing that degree that didn't mean putting her in someone else's hands more than I could live with. Nobody in the room spoke. Even the analysts had stopped typing. I did contract analytics work for a while after, he continued, voice level but thinner now. Good at it. Too good, maybe. The hours kept eating into everything else. I missed 2 parent-teacher conferences in 1 semester. She started falling asleep in the office lobby waiting for me some nights. I looked at her one evening, asleep under my desk with her shoes still on, and I couldn't keep choosing the version of my life that did that to her. Renee said nothing for a moment, studying him with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite admiration, something heavier than either. So I left it, Eli said. Took whatever paid the rent and let me be the one to pick her up and never went back, Renee said. Some things don't wait for you while you're surviving something else. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was the kind of quiet that comes from a room full of people who'd never had to think about survival in those terms, suddenly understanding it for the first time. Renee turned back to the screens. Then survive with us a little longer, Mr. Tanner. By the time legal counsel arrived, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Yoon, the picture had only gotten worse. The transfers traced further. A subsidiary listed as partially liquidated turned out to still hold full title to a logistic facility in Tennessee, quietly undervalued in every report sent upward. A separate reserve fund had been drained in increments small enough to avoid automatic audit triggers. None of it read as a mistake anymore. It read as a pattern, deliberate and patient, designed to make a healthy company look terminal just long enough for someone to buy the wreckage at a fraction of its worth. They weren't rescuing us, Renee said, almost to herself, staring at the Halvorson Group filings spread across the table. They were waiting for us to kneel. At 2:40 that afternoon, with the original filing deadline long since blown past and 3 federal compliance attorneys now on a conference call, Underhill made one final attempt, calm, controlled, almost gentle. The voice of a man trying to remind everyone of who he used to be in that room. He told Renee that even with the corrections, the company was still bleeding, still vulnerable, still hers to lose. He told her that everyone in that room had believed the collapse was coming because deep down she had believed it too. And now your rescue, he said quietly, comes from a man who mops your floors. Renee didn't flinch. My rescue, she said, is that one honest man noticed what every person I pay 6 figures to was too proud to see. The board, convened by emergency video call an hour later, didn't take long once the corrected figures were in front of them. 8 votes against the Halvorson restructuring petition. 2 abstained. Underhill was suspended pending a formal fraud investigation, his access revoked before he'd even left the building under security escort. The bankruptcy filing, the one Renee Calloway had been 1 signature away from submitting that morning, was never sent. It was nearly 6 in the evening when the building finally exhaled. Lawyers packed their files. Analysts who'd been running on coffee and adrenaline since dawn started quietly drifting toward the elevators, the kind of exhaustion settling over them that only comes after a day spent staring directly at how close something came to ending. Eli found his cart still parked by the 17th floor supply closet, exactly where he'd left it 9 hours earlier, and for a moment he just stood there, not sure if he was allowed to simply pick up where he'd left off like nothing had happened. Eli. He turned. Renee stood a few feet away, blazer gone, sleeves rolled, looking less like the woman who'd opened the morning and more like someone who'd just walked through a war and was now starting to feel the weight of it. "Walk with me," she said. She led him not to another conference room, but to a small private lounge on the corner of the floor, glass walls looking out over a skyline just beginning to catch the last gold light of the day. On a side table sat the original Hendricks filing, still unsigned, still resting where someone had set it down that morning before the world tilted sideways. She picked it up, looked at it for a long moment, and tore it cleanly in half. Then again. The sound was small but absolute. "You saved this company today," she said. "You understand that, right? Not the spreadsheet, you." Eli shook his head slightly. "I just noticed one number that didn't sit right." "No," she said, something almost like a smile breaking through the exhaustion on her face. "You spoke up when 12 people with finance degrees had already decided silence was safer." She opened a folder sitting on the table and slid it toward him. Inside was a formal offer letter, Senior Financial Risk Advisor, reporting directly to her office. He read the title and looked up without reaching for it. "I can't work the hours this floor runs on. I have to be the one who picks Hannah up, then you will be. Some days she's sick. Some days there's no warning at all, then you'll leave when that happens. No questions, no penalty." He studied her, searching for the version of this offer that evaporated by Monday morning once the adrenaline wore off. She seemed to understand exactly what he was looking for. "This isn't charity," she said. "It's me fixing the first thing I got wrong today before I get around to fixing the rest." She leaned against the window frame, the last of the day's light catching the tiredness in her face honestly for the first time. "What did you think I was going to do? Thank you and send you back to the supply closet?" He almost smiled. "Crossed my mind. If I say yes," he said slowly, "there are conditions. Childcare support for the overnight cleaning staff before my title means anything to me. Half of them are doing exactly what I was doing 8 months ago, and nobody's noticed them yet either." Renee considered him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Done, and no layoffs this quarter. Not while the corrected numbers hold. Done, and a real review of the health coverage for hourly staff. Not the version that technically qualifies as coverage." She gave a short, surprised laugh, the first real one he'd heard from her all day. "You negotiate like someone who knows exactly what survival costs." "Because I do," he said quietly. The sun kept sinking behind the skyline, gold fading slowly into a deep evening blue over the glass and steel. For a moment, neither of them said anything else. "What does your daughter think you do here?" Renee finally asked. Eli looked out at the city, the lights starting to flicker on floor by floor across the skyline. "She thinks I make things clean before the important people show up." Renee glanced toward the torn pages of the filing sitting in the trash can beside the table. Today she'd be right. An hour later, Eli walked out through the main lobby with his old work gloves folded in one hand and the unopened offer folder tucked under his arm. A few employees near the entrance went quiet as he passed, some of them recognizing him now, some having already heard fragments of a story too strange not to repeat. Nobody laughed this time. Outside, the air had cleared, the kind of crisp evening that comes after a long gray morning finally lets go. Across the street, Hannah stood near the curb outside the after-school program, backpack slung crooked over one shoulder, waving the second she spotted him. "You're late," she said when he reached her, not quite a complaint. "Big day at work. Did you clean everything?" He smiled, crouching despite the ache still sitting in his shoulders from the day, and adjusted the strap on her backpack. Something like that. 19 floors above them, Renee Calloway stood alone at the window of the executive lounge, watching a father and daughter disappear together into the evening crowd below. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the company her grandfather had built didn't feel like something she was holding together out of fear of losing it. It felt like something worth rebuilding, with her eyes finally open to who had been standing in the room all along.